In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read ancient tomes, the order of the Abercast. We are the brave and bold.
Hey, so this month we are doing, we have 6 mainstream episodes and 3 Patreon exclusive episodes. So on the mainstream, we're doing Kabbalah 1 and 2. We're doing the Skull and Bones part 4. I think it's going to be called The Cult of Skull and Bones. Spanish Inquisition or the Black Legend, Sexual Alchemy part 2. And then we're also doing an episode on the stories of Roland. And we have 3 Patreon exclusive episodes. They're all about the Kabbalah. Kabbalah, the supernal triangle, Kabbalah, the moral triangle, and Kabbalah, the psychological triangle. So, but that's not all. Wait, there's more. I stumbled upon this great story about our chivalrous knight, Roland, fighting a giant. That didn't I didn't fit it into the stories of Roland episode. So this month we're going to do this extra kind of mini episode for the mailing list subscribers. Like they'll get it. It's going to wind up being an exclusive video for Patreon supporters. It's called The Brave Knight Roland versus Ferragus the Giant. I had a lot of fun doing it. I'm really excited for it. So if you're interested in catching it in either of those ways, you can sign up for the mailing list or check it out on Patreon. The Spanish Inquisition was set up by King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella in 1478, empowered by Pope Sixtus IV. Its object was to proceed against lapsed converts from Judaism, crypto-Jews, and other apostates whose secret activities were dangerous to church and state. And it was extended to the Christian Moors, who were in danger of apostasy. It established itself in Spanish America, and from about 1550 till well into the 17th century, it was keeping Spain clear of Protestantism. It also inflicted punishment for such offenses as masquerading as a priest to deceive the people, bigamy, encouraging polygamy, perjury, forging, and shaming revelations. That's a way to say weird sex stuff. Shaming revelations is just weird. Is a weird sex stuff. As early as 1480, complaint was made to Rome of the excess of the Holy Office of Spain, and its first 100 years of existence were its worst. Through the subsequent suppression of Protestantism was received more attention. Both its cruelties and the number of death penalties inflicted have been exaggerated, but were sufficiently scandalous to excite horror. And it has not been established that it was other than a primary ecclesiastical tribunal, though much under the influence of the civil power. But the unholy severity of both the Spanish and French Inquisition was tempered by the fact that they flourished in the days before police and other organizations, and procedure was in a state of efficiency, which itself involves inhumanity. Dusty motherfucker.
The Abercast. Occult. History. Conspiracy. Violence.
right, welcome to the Abercast. I'm your homeboy, John. I'll be your homeboy for the evening. I'm your podcast homeboy for the evening. Okay, let's see. Before I get started on this is one of those episodes where it's kind of like, it's a history episode. For sure, it's a history episode, but it's also a look at propaganda. It's a look at propaganda, and it's a look at history. And I've got to say that there's going to be some shit here that's said that if you're a little bit on the sensitive side, as far as religions are concerned, or maybe as far as some race issues are concerned, you might want to skip this one. I don't see that it's a big deal, but I'm looking out for you bros. So there's all the fucking trigger warnings you're gonna get. I'd like to encourage everyone to rate and review on iTunes. I'd like to encourage everyone to check out the website. There's social media links at the bottom. There's feature topic links. There's stigmatastudio.com or abercast.com. I'd like to encourage everyone to check into the mailing list. When you get, I don't really abuse my mailing list at all, but when you check into it, it automatically emails you a free link to an exclusive part of the website where you can get bonus content. It's right now it's called The Plan. It's scanned in bits and pieces of my notebook, where I do the shows from, and also especially for like the tarot card episodes and upcoming grimoires and stuff, there'll be ways for you to see the symbols and things that I'm talking about instead of just skipping over them. The last but not least, I'd like to encourage everyone to check out Patreon. Patreon is awesome. On top of the reward tiers that you get, there is also there's a ton right now of free or exclusive content. There's like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and there's like 13 episodes right now. 13. I want to say modern episode. Like there are 13 brand new episodes for the last 13 episodes in 3 months that are up on Patreon. It's from the topics range from the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean, to part 1 of Crowley's Liber Abba or Magic. It's all about mysticism. A lot of stuff about meditation and yoga in those episodes. And then this month is we're starting our series on sex magic. So we started on this old book called The Influence of the Phallic Idea in Religions of Antiquity. So instead of just jumping into sex magic, I thought we could look at some symbols in sex symbols in religious stories that most of us already know pretty well. So that's there. And then on top of the Patreon stuff, on top of all the bonus episodes, on top of all the tier rewards and all that stuff, a portion of all that Patreon stuff, a portion of, if you want to make donations, there's a link in the show notes, a portion of the donations and a portion of the ad revenue that I get from these episodes go to Tomes for Troopers, which is where we a portion of that money that I get from all those avenues goes to donating books to soldiers that are deployed overseas. So they write like what kind of books they're looking for or whatever, and we hunt them down and send them to them. So it's been pretty successful so far. The only reason it hasn't been more successful is because I'm looking for more support to do that. So those are Patreon's a great place to get involved in that. All right, so okay, so we're talking about this evening. We're talking about the Spanish Inquisition and the Spanish black legend. This episode is a continuation and kind of probably a bit of a conclusion to our Inquisition series. We started way back at the with the Albigensian Crusade. And it was actually called the Albigensian Crusade, the Gnostic Holocaust episode. And then we did an episode on the Medieval Inquisition. It was called the Medieval Inquisition, A Question of Heresy. Awesome names. And then this episode tonight. So what I want you to do is I want you to go ahead and charge your jars, ladies and gentlemen. You know the formula for the weapon of mass distraction. I want you to charge it. It's like in a Bugs Bunny or cartoon, where you mix it in there and then you pour like the final ingredient and like a smoke skull and crossbones, like a like a fucking mushroom cloud comes out of your jar. You know that you've done it right when that happens. So yeah, go ahead, man, get your jihad, man it up. Because tonight we're talking about the Spanish Inquisition and the Spanish black legend. But with these things like this, we can't just start like the definition that I read in that code open was straight from the Catholic Encyclopedia. It was dusty as shit. Closed it and almost fucking choked myself. Yeah, it's the Catholic Dictionary. But you can't, when we look at this, we can't just look at it from Ferdinand and Isabella because things don't happen in vacuums. And this is a perfect example of that, like why you have to put stuff in context. This is like a textbook examination of the accepted history and why you have to look at other things that were going around at the time. What were the other things happening at the time? So in my point of view, we can't just start at Ferdinand and Isabella. We can't even, start at the Protestant Reformation, or even the 1439 invention of all things, the fucking printing press. We can't even start there, but all those things have a place in our story. In order to understand the Spanish Inquisition, we need to go back to the Umayyad Caliphate. You're like, oh, here we go. It's the Caliphate, is it? So a lot of the stuff from this episode comes from a book called The Spanish Inquisition, The Divine Conspiracy by Helen Rawlings. So we have to go... We have to go back in time to this Umayyad Caliphate, which was the second of the four major caliphates established after the death of Muhammad. Okay, so I've said it before all the fucking time. I say, whenever Islam comes up on the podcast, I say, I feel like I say that by its nature, Islam is expansionist. It's the duty of Muslims to spread and to take territory and eventually have these caliphates. They rule the world through Islam, convert people, and do all this stuff and so forth. So in 711, Tariq ibn Zayed, a Muslim commander, led an invasion force from North Africa into southern Spain. And there was this Visigoth king called King Roderick. And he was killed. And then this guy, he was like another dude in charge. His name was Count Theudemir. Capitulated to these Muslim invaders. It's like I said, it's expansionist. This is I believe this is after the Battle of Tours. We're going to do an episode on the Battle of Tours. This is one of those things that I always threaten to do to you guys, is do an episode on the Battle of Tours. So we're going to get to it eventually. So Thurmond, or whatever his name is, Theudemir capitulates to these Muslims, and his lands become a client state to this caliphate. And it's called a jizya, where they're like, the Muslims are like, okay, well, we're the boss now, and you have to pay us because we rule you. It's like a tax, this jizya tax. They have to pay to be ruled by Muslims. And soon the whole Iberian Peninsula was ruled by this caliphate. It was called the Al-Andalus. And if towns resisted, they were stormed and taken by force. Toledo was one of these towns. Holy Toledo was one of these towns that was taken by force. But a lot of places just rolled over. A lot of places were just like, yo, we don't have the resources to fight, or, they're just, I don't know, being pussies about it or whatever. So it happens, like it happens everywhere. Churches were taken over. They were turned into mosques. And in 1756, the Umayyad Caliphate was overthrown by another caliphate called the Caliphate of Cordoba. And they took over. And in 976, the Caliph Al-Hakam II died, and his son, who was 10 years old, became the caliph. And it was the beginning of the end for the Caliphate of Cordoba. As time wore on, the caliphate was unable to stop the expanding northern Christian kingdoms, and the Muslim territory continued to fracture and to shrink. And the last Muslim emirate, they call it the Kingdom of Granada, which cracks me up because when I was growing up, my granddad always had Granada. Like, he would buy these Ford Granadas, and they would last he must have had 3 of them, I think, at one time. He would buy them, and they would just last forever, and they were just like a tank. And they had these really distinctive headlight fixtures. I remember. I actually built a character after one of my grandpa's Granadas. Sergeant Lane McCord. His head basically looks like the front grille of a Granada. Anyhow, this emirate of Granada was defeated by the armies of Castile and Aragon under Isabella and Ferdinand in God damn it, why do I keep saying that? 1492. And before we get into this, we should ask, what is the impact? What's the cultural impact of, 780 years of Muslim occupation? What happens to your culture being subjugated by Muslims for 780 years? And, just like everything, when you look back, we just did a few episodes a while back about the First Crusade. And you read these historians and they jump through these wild hoops to tell you how awesome these Muslim rulers were, and just how great whenever they took over a Christian land, they were really cool to everybody. You just run into it constantly. And especially I can't remember what episode it was. They just jump through these hoops to make these the one time when Godfrey de Bouillon traveled, he crossed this body of water to take these Muslims to fight them. And this was in the First Crusade. And the Muslims had already defeated and deflected and beat back the peasants' revolt. And so he knew, his people told him, hey, these crusaders are coming. And he was just like, well, we whipped the shit out of the peasants' crusade, so fuck these guys. I don't even have to be here for this. But so when Godfrey de Bouillon shows up and starts fucking shit up, it's all these historians were like, oh my God, though. But if he knew they were real knights instead of the peasants, he would have totally changed his tactics. Well, fucking duh. They don't mention, I'm getting all fucking wound up. Okay, I gotta calm down. I get back to this. Oh, yeah. Okay. So what's the impact of being ruled for 780 years by caliphates, this Muslim occupation of Spain? What's going to become Spain? What's the impact to the culture of Iberia? You know, there's, like I said, varying degrees of tyranny depending on how flowery or apologetic the historian that you're reading is. But but you have to imagine culturally, societally, and psychologically, it's probably a pretty huge change. You know what I mean? You know, you're being ruled by Muslims for 780 years. Then all of a sudden they're like, boop, boop, they're all gone. Professor Edward Peters from the University of Pennsylvania wrote a book called Inquisition. And he says, quote, "The Inquisition was regarded outside Spain as necessary cleansing, since all Spaniards were accused of having Moorish and Jewish ancestry, first condemned by the impurity of their beliefs, and the Spanish then came under fire for the excess of zeal in defending Catholicism. Influenced by the political and the religious policies of Spain, a common type of ethnic incentive became as eloquent form of description by character assassination. So when Bartolome de la Casa wrote in his criticism of certain government policies in the New World, his limited persona, specific purposes were ignored." So that's something. This is, I believe, he is talking, and to a certain degree, I think that he is perpetuating what we're going to learn is called the Black Legend. But just to get back to the story or the thread that I've weaved in here about what this occupation has done to the culture. I found these 3 articles. I don't know if I'm going to read all 3 of them. I'm going to get started. We're going to see what happens. But these articles about Spanish ancestry, and you have to think, like, as a people, you know, you're looking around and you've been, I'm not going to say corrupted, but like you've been, maybe I've just dug myself into a politically incorrect hole I can't get out of. I'm not going to say corrupted. I'll say that you know you've been assimilated to a point. Okay, so here I'm just going to get into it, and then I'll try to clean up the mess when I get done with these. Gene studies show Spain's Jewish and Muslim ancestry. This is from an article. I can't remember where I got this from. I got them from like mainstream places, but I forgot to write down the fucking thing. So if you want to find it, it's just called Gene Study Shows Spain, Jewish and Muslim Ancestry. It's by Nicholas Wade, November 5th, 2008. The genetic signature of people in Spain and Portugal provide new and explicit evidence of the mass conversions of separatic Jews and Muslims. Now, when they say this word separatic, I don't know what the root of the word separatic is, but when you see this, what it means is it means Jews from the Iberian Peninsula. They're talking about Spanish Jews. To the conversion of these Jews and Muslims to Catholicism in the 15th and 16th centuries. After Christian armies wrested Spain back from Muslim control, a team of geneticists reports 20% of the population of the Iberian Peninsula has Sephardic Jewish ancestry, and 11% have DNA reflecting Moorish ancestors. The geneticists have found historians have debated how many Jews converted and how many chose exile. We're going to get to all this in a little while. One wing grossly underestimates the number of conversions, said Jane Gerber, an expert in separatic history at State University of New York. The finding bears on two different views of the Spanish history, said Dr. Jonathan Ray, a professor of Jewish studies at Georgetown. One proposed by the 20th century historian Claudio Sanchez Alborens, who holds that Spanish civilization as Catholic and the other influences are foreign. The other sees Spain as having been enriched by drawing from all three historical cultures, Catholic, Jewish, and Muslim. I am not debating that. I'm actually not debating anything. So I'm just looking into the future. Okay. The study based on the analysis of Y chromosomes was conducted by a biologist led by Mark Jobling of the University of Leicester in England and Dr. Francis Caffel of the Pompeu Fabra University in Barcelona. They developed a Y chromosome signature for Sephardic men by studying Sephardic Jewish communities in places where Jews migrated after being expelled from Spain in 1492 and 96. They also characterized the Y chromosome of the Arab and Berber army that invaded Spain AD 711. The data on people living in Morocco and the Western Sahara. After a period of forbearance under the Arab Umayyad dynasty, Spain entered a period of religious intolerance. See, here we go. This is the black legend. Spain entered a period of religious intolerance, with the Muslim Berber dynasties forcing Christians and Jews to convert to Islam. Oh, maybe it wasn't. I should read these things more carefully when I'm prepping. And the victorious Christians then expelling the Jews and Muslims, forcing them to convert. To the new genetic study reports online that on Thursday that the American Journal of Human Genetics indicates there was a high level of conversion among Jews. Okay, I'm just going to move to the next one. Many Spaniards found to have Jewish or Muslim ancestry. Study shows that 1 in 3 have traces of Jews or Moors forced to convert or leave Spain in 15th, 16th century by Giles Trimlett in Madrid. I believe this article was from The Guardian. They may have expelled them centuries ago, but a large number of Spaniards still conserve the imprint of their country's Jews and Muslims in their genes. Science has discovered almost 1 in 3 Spaniards carry traces of Jews who were told to leave or convert to the Christianity at the end of the 15th century, or the Muslim Moors who followed them into exile a century later. The study by scientists from European universities find that despite the attempts at ethnic cleansing, 1 in 10 Spanish men bore evidence of Northern African and presumably Moorish forebearers in their DNA. The number almost doubled when they tested for DNA traces that pointed to Sephardi ancestors. The Sephardis were Jews with family origins in the Iberian Peninsula. See, you guys already knew that. These proportions attest a high level of religious conversions, whether voluntary or enforced. All right, that's the point. Let's see. Southern Europeans more African than thought. This is by Tia Gose, senior writer. I didn't write down what fucking newspaper. I usually am pretty good at that. June 3rd, 2013. Southern Europeans get a significant portion of their genetic ancestry from North Africa. These findings are perhaps not surprising, given that the Romans occupied North Africa. It set up extensive trade routes in the region, and the Moors, a North African people, ruled medieval territory called El Andalus, which we already talked about, on the Iberian Peninsula. So you could tell this is one of these flowers. It's like, oh, they just North African people just ruled this medieval territory. Like, they weren't vile, they weren't invading tyrants. But the findings published today on June 3rd in the journal Proceeding of the National Academy of Sciences suggested the impact of these connections went beyond culture and architecture, and they may explain why Southern Europeans have more genetic diversity than their northern counterparts. A high level of genetic variation in Southern Europeans reflect a gene flow from North Africa during historical times. We're talking about the last 2,000 years, really, from a Middle Age during which there was an occupation in Spain. Yeah, so, I mean, you guys get it, right? All right, what do we got? Patreon this month. This month, we started out with 2 Kabbalah episodes. And on Patreon in December, we expand on them with 3 exclusive episodes: Kabbalah, the supernal triangle, Kabbalah, the moral triangle, and Kabbalah, the psychological triangle. We take a deeper dive into this ancient Jewish mysticism for only $5. You get a deeper understanding of the Kabbalah because it ties into a lot of the topics that we find ourselves immersed in right now. Sex magic and also tarot cards. But on the $3 tier, you'll be able to get all of this month's episodes commercial free right away. The whole month's worth of episodes is on there already. Kabbalah 1 and 2, Skull and Bones. I think it's gonna be called Skull and Bones Part 4, or like Skull and Bones, the cult. I don't know what it's going to be called. The Spanish Inquisition, the Black Legend, and Sexual Alchemy Part 2. And then we're going to do the stories of Roland there towards the end. There's a total of 17 exclusive episodes, all within the last 3 months. That's been put up there. Brand new exclusive episodes. You can't find them anywhere else. And then there's a total of 10 hours of bonus audio up there as well. And, you know, the swag, bookmarks, tattoos, fake tattoos, mason jars, t-shirts, etc. Partial proceeds for all of this goes to Tomes for Troopers. So thank you. This month for Tomes for Troopers, we sent out another D&D book to a soldier in Afghanistan. This one is more nearer and dearer to my heart, but we sent out deities and demigods out to this guy. A portion of all ad revenue, donations, and Patreon support goes to helping send deployed U.S. servicemen and women books or other medias. The donation link is in the show notes. The Patreon link is in the show notes. And over the last 3 or 4 months, I'm proud to say that we've been able to ship out over $80 worth of books and media. So thank you guys for all the support. And if you're interested in helping, check out those donation links or that Patreon link. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to get into the thing. Okay, so Ferdinand II, who was king of Aragon, the Catholic king of Aragon, they actually called him Ferdinand the Catholic, from 1479 to his death. And he married the future queen of Castile, her name was Isabella, creating the foundation of a unified Spain and the establishment of the Spanish monarchy. So there's basically, there was they called it Hispaniola, but there was basically no such thing as Spain until these two kingdoms united, and they were like, all right, now we're Catholics. We're all Catholics, and we're gonna kick all these fucking people out of here. So these guys they're actually key historical figures, and not because of the Inquisition, and not because of what the stuff that they did, expelling the Jews and all this stuff, by creating the Spanish Empire, which we're going to talk about later, but it was like the first transatlantic empire. You know, they opened trade up to the New World. The Spanish did. There was a lot of blood and guts with it, yes, but another thing that they did, you know, while I guess the first part of opening up that trade is they funded Christopher Columbus's first voyage. You know, so Ferdinand is up there, to me, in my personal kind of like pantheon or whatever. He's up there with Vlad Tepes, and he's up there with Jan Sobieski in my book. Like, the reason Europe didn't speak Pishtun or Moorish in this case is because of this basically it was because of this fucking guy. He should be a key historical figure of the West, not only for his Christian reconquest of Iberia, but the funding of Christopher Columbus's voyage. And the last thing that we have to take into account as we're looking at the Spanish Inquisition is between 1299 and 1453 on the other side of Europe. He's looking across the Mediterranean. The Ottoman Empire was rising, and in 1453, the Ottoman Empire started its expansion. Like I said many times before, it's the duty of Muslims to expand. The mandate of Islam is to expand and conquer, convert. The Ottoman expansion doesn't halt until 1683 when Jan Sobieski, the King of Poland, broke the Ottoman Empire at the gates of Vienna, and it actually still limped on until post-World War I. After post-World War I, I think it was in 1922 is when it finally dissolved or whatever. Ferdinand and Isabella finally unifying Spain, Catholic Spain, after 780 years of Islamic rule. He's looking across Italy, and he's looking across Greece and at Turkey. And there was a real fear of another Muslim invasion. A lot of places that talk about the Spanish Inquisition don't take any of this into context. They jump right in with Ferdinand and Isabella, and they make it about racism, intolerance, and religious hatred. And this is, you know, this is the start of what's called the Spanish Black Legend. And well, I gotta tell you guys, I love Spain. I've vacationed in Spain. Years ago, I went to Lloret de Mar, Spain, and you know, we went to Barcelona and watched bullfights and did all the stuff you do in Spain. I was partying with these two Croatian chicks. Oh my god, brother. Anyhow, I mentioned, oh my god, I've mentioned this term, the Spanish Black Legend, a few times, and I know I haven't got into it yet because we're going to get into it right now. So, this is what's called the Spanish Black Legend. Black Legend is a historiographical phenomenon where a sustained trend in historical writings of biased. God damn, that drink is rough, dude. Bro. Biased reporting and introduction of fabricated, exaggerated, and or decontextualized facts directed against a particular person's, nations, or institutions with the intention of creating a distorted and uniquely inhuman image of them while hiding their positive contributions to history. Am I saying the Spanish Inquisition is fake news? No, I'm not saying that, not necessarily. I'm just talking about the idea of the Spanish Inquisition might be exaggerated, or parts of it might be exaggerated. Ironically, the Muslims, who would do this exaggeration? Is it the Muslims? And ironically, God damn it, I lost my place. The Muslims do not play into the Black Legend, which also gives us an idea of its origins. In 1439, the printing press was invented, and throughout the Inquisition, anti-Spanish or this drink is really shaking me to my core. I don't know what I did to it. I must have just double dipped on the shots. I don't know. It's very troubling. All right. Once the printing press got invented, anti-Spanish or anti-Spanish Inquisition stories were being pushed out like crazy. Stories of converted Jews being hideously tortured and so forth. The premier and most influential work was Sanctae Inquisitionis Hispanae Artes, a discovery and plain declaration of sundry subtle practices of the Holy Inquisition of Spain, written by a guy using a pseudonym of Reginaldus Gonzlavius Montanus. Everyone just calls him Montanus because the rest of it is fucking really hard to pronounce. Who was probably a Protestant Spaniard. This thing was published in 1567. The book describes the cruel procedures of the Inquisition in graphic detail. There is also a critical history of the Spanish Inquisition, 1817. The history of the reign of Ferdinand and Isabella, 1837. The deconstructive, repressive force of the Inquisition, deeming it to be responsible for centuries of unspeakable oppression and misery. So am I saying that it wasn't a force of repression and misery? I'm not saying that at all. But what do you expect? Well, no one expected the Spanish Inquisition. That's I've been waiting. Ugh. All right, so was it the Jews? Is that what I'm saying? The Spanish Black Legend was being pushed by political, colonial, and religious rivals of England and France. So who am I talking about? Remember, or we will get to it in a minute, the Inquisition was established in 1478, and it went for, Jesus Christ, 356 years. Martin Luther published the 95 Thesis in 1517. So the idea of the press as Protestants pumping out propaganda against the Catholics, England and France, and against the newish Spanish Empire. Spain was on the forefront of opening up the new world for trade. It wasn't just some kind of backwater country. They were the first transatlantic empire. That to me makes sense. That Protestantism was using propaganda for the first time. And you can see in some of these things, images wood cuttings and drawings of Spanish people feeding babies to the wolves, and Spanish people doing Spaniards doing all kinds of crazy things. And also in this propaganda, you will see, we talked about propaganda a lot. I think in some of the Vietnam episodes we were talking about, was it? I don't know. I can't really remember. But we were talking about propaganda maybe it was a Desert 73 Easting, maybe, when we were talking about, they always say, you have to do something. And they're, as far as propaganda is concerned, when you're turning a group of people into the other, what you do is you have to be like, look at what they're doing to their women and their children. Look at what they're doing to their women and their children. That's a common refrain. And you see this in the Black legend literature. In any event, back to Ferdinand, what is now erroneously called forced conversions happened. That was the official policy. Jews, Muslims, whatever, must convert or leave. You see, it's a misnomer. It wasn't forced conversion. You had a choice, right? It's not like, if you don't convert, I'm going to cut your fucking head off. It's all you have to do is just leave town. Just get the fuck out of here. You had a choice. You must take on the cross or pack your fucking bags. So in 1478, the Spanish Inquisition was established. An efficient, strict, discerning bureaucracy spread through Spain and all the Spanish colonies and territories. It was tasked with finding, like the Cold Open said, crypto Jews. After the expulsion, the Jews were expelled in 1492, and the crypto Muslims after the Muslim expulsion in 1610. So what it means when I say crypto is where it's like the crypto Jews or the crypto Muslims. They would pretend, they would pretend to be converted Christians, and then they would go home and, pray to Mecca, or they would go home and fucking spin their dreidels or whatever. That's what a crypto Jew is. And so one of the main tasks of the Inquisition, besides keeping Protestantism at bay, was also finding crypto Jews and these crypto Muslims. We have talked about the medieval Inquisition in the past, and there were different inquisitional tribunals in Europe. And the big difference, as I see it here with the Spanish Inquisition, is the Spanish Inquisition answered to the crown and not to the Pope. So the Catholic dictionary says that the Ferdinand and Isabella were given their leave by the Pope, or they were bolstered by the Pope. And but at the end of the day, these inquisitors didn't answer to this Pope, Sixtus the Fourth. There's even evidence that some of these inquisitors weren't even clergy, but lawyers, and they were wannabe statesmen, which might explain why they started investigating some of the crimes they eventually got into. Like, they got into investigating fraud and stuff, which the Catholic dictionary even talks about in their entry. So they had a strict structure. There was like a Grand Inquisitor and like 2 or 3 regular old inquisitors. Then there was like a clerk or a notary who was like a scribe. He wrote down like everything. So there was like a support staff. And they were forged into these units and sent out into the Spanish countryside. And one of the things that they did, and you see, this is a telltale sign of bureaucracy going crazy, is they do reports on everything. Like you're just a dude and you're like, oh, I got to send an email to this dude or whatever. Say you're like an artist, like say you're a independent comic book guy and you host a podcast on the side and you have to send like some business email somewhere. So you fucking send it. And that's like the end of it. But if you were a bureaucracy and you had many people, you would have to be like, where is my TP242 report about this email? Or you better save your emails, so this big state bureaucracy kept records. And a few years ago, they started popping these records open and going through them. And they started like looking at, we're going to talk a little bit later about the roles that these people had. Oh, another person that they had in their unit was a torture person, and they also had a doctor, because it was their rules. I'm just going to read this because we're going to get to all this stuff. I'm just jumping ahead. But the point is that when they started busting these records open and looking at them, they were like, this doesn't sound like the Edgar Allan Poe stories of the Spanish Inquisition. This doesn't sound like the literary, it doesn't sound like the historical trope of the Spanish Inquisition. You know, they were looking at it and the records that these dudes kept on what they did, and then they were able to find these books that were like these rule books and stuff, and it showed a stark disconnect from the popular regurgitated stories than to what actually happened, and that gets piled into this black legend. So, all right, we're gonna get back to it. So they spread over the Spanish countryside to find these crypto Jews and these Moors who were converts, but they were sliding back into their religion, and they'd still stuck around Spain. They were using informants, small town politics, local churches, and they were soon rooting out heretics of all sorts. Protestants, Eastern Orthodox Church, the Eastern Orthodoxy church members were being rooted out. There were trials and tribunals regarding witchcraft and superstition and blasphemy. And here's an interesting one. They were rooting out sodomy. And in their sodomy trials, they found 500 cases of pedophilia that they did judgment on. They ran people up for Freemasonry. They ran people up for bigamism, being a bigot, unnatural marriages, and that was between a marriage of two people that couldn't procreate. So they're not seeing fags. They're saying that was maybe too harsh. Given the goodwill that you've showed me from sticking this far into the podcast. So, two people who can't procreate, I don't think they're talking about homosexuals. I think they're talking about, people low T or soy boys or whatever. They just couldn't do it, Another thing that they were prosecuting is they were prosecuting rape, bestiality, and incest, which I thought it was fascinating. Not the bestiality part, but this thing with the sodomy and the pedophilia and the rape and the incest. I thought that this was really progressive, actually, for the time. They would also prosecute people for espionage, tax fraud, and child abuse, and treason. People would be rounded up. Confessionals would be offered, and light penances would be not penances. Penances would be issued. So they would ride into a town, and they had a script, right? And you could find this online. It was like the different steps of bringing a town into the Inquisition, or bringing an Inquisition into the town. It'd be like, you have a town meeting and you'd be like, look, this is what we're here for. And if anyone wants to confess now, you could just confess. And they would set up a little confessional, and people would go in. They'd be like, yeah, man, hey, I fucked my wife in the ass one time, or whatever. And they'd be like, okay, well, here's your Hail Marys and all this stuff, what you got to do. And so all these would be light. These penances would be light. And then as the investigations would go forward, and they would start drawing in informants on you, they would start drawing in your neighbor who might want to fuck your wife in the ass or whatever. You would get them involved in like doing tattletales and stuff, and they would it would be this intrigue, and you wouldn't be able to, one of the great things about our legal system is that you get the right to confront your accuser. And that's a lesson learned right from these secret tribunals, where people weren't, in some cases, they weren't even told what they were accused of. They were just like lock you in a room and be like, are you ready to confess yet? Confess to what? All right, well, you're not ready. Here's your slop for today. Or whatever. We'll most likely kill you in the morning. So these would be like, and then there would be imprisonment, and then there would be torture. But when these guys cracked open these records and start looking through this bureaucracy, they found that all the torture was strictly regulated. I'm not saying that's right. I'm pretty much on the books and saying that tyranny in all forms is wrong. I don't know. I've really dug myself into a hole with this whole episode. I feel like maybe I should just re-record it. So there's a book called there's an Inquisition rule book called Instrucciones del Santo Officio. Inquisition rule book Instrucciones del Santo Officio. Instrucciones. So all this torture had to be, there were time limits on how often you were allowed to torture each crime, suspicion of each crime, and the doctor's supervision had to be there all the time to do it. So there's one guy out there who's like, I read through all this shit, and I haven't found anyone that got tortured more than twice for 10 or 15 minutes each time. And there's also people out there that are saying the reason that the Spanish Inquisition was actually around was to save people's lives. So the Catholic Church wouldn't come in and start flaying people and skinning them alive and burning them at the stake. The Spanish Inquisition was under the rule of Ferdinand and Isabella. So, to save lives, which I thought that was interesting. I didn't spend a whole lot of time researching that aspect of it, but I do think it was really interesting. Maybe we'll revisit it at some point. Okay, so the next step would be the punishment would be dealt out. If possible, the heretic would be reconciled into the church, into the village, and into the society. So the most serious punishments had to bounce back to a more secular part of the government. So the Inquisition, even though that some of them were attorneys and they weren't acting for the Pope, they were acting for Catholicism, I guess. So if someone needed to be put to death, it actually bounced to the local magistrate. So like these witch finders and stuff, these guys with the big funny hats with the belt buckles on them, like they weren't actually burning people at the stake. They would be like, hey man, I tried to fucking fix this shit and I tried to get you to confess and all this other stuff, but now you got to burn at the stake, and you know, the butcher in your town's going to wind up having to fucking do it. So these poor sons of bitches were burned at the stake. After 356 years, in 1834, the Inquisition was finally disbanded. I mean, that's like after the founding of our countries, dudes. Like, it survived for a long time. So that's my take on the Spanish Inquisition. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not saying that I even side with it, it's just one of those things in history that you look at and you're like, why? Why is it? And why was it? And then the more you look at it, you're like, oh, it wasn't even. And it didn't even. And then you're like, well, why does everyone think it is? I guess that's a funny way to look at it, but that's kind of how I approached it. I actually wasn't even planning on doing a Spanish Inquisition episode because I'm like, everybody knows this. Like, Monty Python guys do a fucking joke about it. Put him in the comfy chair. Put him in the comfy couch. Put him in the dish rack. I thought it was so prevalent that I couldn't even add anything new to it. And then the more I looked at it, the more I found this Black Legend business, I was like, oh, there is something to be had here. And it is an interesting, kind of, look at early propaganda. I actually think it deserves a better look at it. I actually feel like I kind of failed you guys. I didn't look at the Black Legend stuff enough, but there's always next week or next month. I'm John Towers. This is the Abercast, and thank you guys for tuning in. I appreciate all your support, and I appreciate everything. I appreciate you guys taking your time to listen to this episode or the show at all with whatever you're doing in your life right now, and may it serve you well. And if you guys have any vitriol to spit at me because of my cultural insensitivity, I guess you can fucking just do it. I guess if it'll make you feel better. But But yeah, I didn't mean to offend anybody. I even gave trigger warnings, and they were non-ironic, which is weird for me. Okay, so this is the Abercast. I would like to encourage everyone to rate and review on iTunes. Check out the website, stigmatastudios.com or abercast.com. Social media links are there at the bottom. There's also a feature topic link, so check that out. If you're interested in the topic of the show, you can find the other shows that this one is linked to. Newsletter, got some fun stuff going on the newsletter, especially since we start doing the tarot card episodes. So check that out, because you get a link to an exclusive part of the website that you could download images and stuff from my notebook, stuff that we're actually talking about. So I don't have to skip over it. Like you guys have access to these images that I'll be talking about on the episodes, like in the last tarot card episode. And Patreon, check out the Patreon. There's tons of great reward tiers. On top of that, there's a ton, like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, a great deal of exclusive content on there. That's gold. I mean, it's all gold. Like, I'm like, why can't I have done an episode like this for the mainstream? And then on top of that, I forgot to mention that all the shows that are done are up early on the Patreon page. All the mainstream shows that are done early are uploaded early. So, I mean, there's tons of stuff up there. So go check that out. And I'm John, and this is Whatever, and the Abercast, and this has been the Spanish Inquisition and the Black Legend. And, yeah, thanks for sticking with me through all this. Very painful. I feel like I need to record this whole fucking thing. All right, thanks for tuning in. I appreciate each and one of you guys. Please let me know what you think of the topic and what you think of the show. If you go to abercast.com, you can find the links to all my social media there, so let me know what you think. You can also find the featured topic link, so you can easily find other episodes linked to this one. And also, if you're interested in my comic books or graphic novels, you can find links there. You can pick up a shirt. There's plenty of stuff to keep you busy on the website. Patreon support, patreon.com/Abercast. There's some fun swag. There's 17 exclusive episodes done just over the last few months. Brand new exclusive episodes, 17 of them. And then there's also over 10 hours of other bonus material that you can't find anywhere else there as well. And a portion of all that stuff goes for Tomes for Troopers. Donate link is paypal.me/Stigmata Studios. Portion of that also goes to Tomes for Troopers. And the plan, you can sign up for the mailing list to get the graphic stuff. So what happens is you sign in to the mailing list stuff, and then it'll send you a link to the secret part of the website where you can go and download special graphics that accompany the episode. So if I'm talking about the Kabbalah Tree of Life and the Supernal Triangle, you go there and get a better idea of what I'm talking about, because I actually crack open my notebook and scan it in for the newsletter people. And I'd like to also remind everybody and encourage everybody to rate and review on iTunes. And thank you guys very much.